Put the whoosy on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit.
All right, hello. So I just did a little episode with Greg Wells. We talked about this Greg Holden record that we both worked on. We were very ambitious. We were hoping to get 2 songs done, but that didn't happen, mostly because I love hanging out with Greg Wells. He's super fun to talk to. He's just a very thoughtful, brilliant guy, and we ended up talking a lot, and we didn't get through everything we wanted to. We got all the way through one of the songs that we wanted to do, which was Hold On Tight. There's another song on the record called Save Yourself that we both thought would be a cool example of drum mixing. We talked about it a little bit in the previous episode, but it's some pretty heavy-handed drum mixing, and it's a good example of how transformative the mixing process can be with drums. There really aren't any samples being used except for just downbeats of sections to add a little extra weight to when a new section initiates. Other than that, it is the all the drums that he recorded, just the mics that he used when he recorded the drums. So I'm doing this one by myself. Greg's a busy guy. He ran out of time, and so I wasn't lucky enough to have him around for this as well. But he is going to send some pictures of the drum setup, so we'll be able to kind of see the whole thing. And he talked a lot about his drum setup, which was mostly stayed the same when he was working at his place, Rocket Carousel. So all that will apply to this as well. So let's just dive right into it, and you can start checking it out. I'll play a little bit of the song first so you can see how the drums sort of fit into this picture.
Here comes the moment, now it's all changed, and now I realize what I've got to say. But if I say it, will you hear me? 'Cause nothing good is ever easy. I've been released, but I can't let go, so I keep searching for the high road. And it might look perfect, but believe me, nothing good is ever easy. Don't keep looking back.
So you get the idea. It's kind of like some classic Tom Petty sounding kind of stuff. He has a great sounding drum room. It's sort of like a medium-sized room, and an amazing drum kit that he talked about in the other episode. It's a vintage Slingerland kit. I think he said from the 30s. It's an old drum set. He has Ross Garfield come and tune the drums for him, so the drums sound amazing. They're tuned as good as they could possibly be. The toms in particular sound so extraordinary on this recording. But let's do one thing real quick here. I have it set up so I can easily switch between just his original mics, the way they went in. So here it is, just no plugins on here. It's muted right now. And then you can see all of my shenanigans up here. There's a bunch of plugins and me doing a bunch of stuff to try and do my drum thing on it. And so let's see. We'll just focus on the band here. I'm going to mute the vocals, and so I'm going to let it play, and I'm going to switch to just what the drums are without any mixing at all, so you can kind of hear the difference. With a bunch of mixing on it, on the drum. So that's what the drums sound like unmixed. That's with all the compression. So here it is soloed. So unmixed drums, mixed drums. And, you know, to be fair, I got his permission to do this. You know, the drums that I or anybody record into the computer generally sound like this. This is a great drum recording. That's what it sounds like. Sounds like mics on a drum kit. All of that explosive punch and power and attack and aggressiveness and stuff, you know, really gets brought out in the mixing quite often. So let's see what happened here. So we'll go back to the mixed version. So as I mentioned, there was only one sample being used on this mixing. You can see it here. It is right on the downbeat of when the whole song starts, and then there's a spot here where it hits again. Here it is at the beginning of the pre-chorus, and then this is sort of a broken down chorus, so didn't put it at the beginning of the chorus. So yeah, it's just to add a little bit extra weight. So the sample sounds like this. It's the same sample that I used on the other song, Hold On Tight. It's from an Ice Cube, the rapper Ice Cube. It's from a song of his. I love this kick sample. Just super solid and punchy, not too clicky on the attack. It just blends in beautifully with a live drum kit. So then his kick drum that he recorded, there's a couple of sources here. So there's an inside mic. Sounds like that. I obviously gated it. I use FabFilter Pro G. Love this plugin. It's the only one that I've found that really gets look ahead right. All the other ones don't really do it the way I need them to, where you have, you know, almost fully 10 milliseconds of look ahead available in the plugin. I'm frequently up in this range, you know, so this is like 4 milliseconds of look ahead. Okay, and then at this time I was using a whole lot of this Massenburg parametric EQ plugin. And so big high pass at 274. I'm using this inside mic just as the attack sound of the kick drum, not using it for low end at all. So there it is with that on there. And then FabFilter Saturn, another amazing plugin from FabFilter. So what I'm doing is, let's see, what was it? Yeah. So I'm just adding distortion in a multi-band way. So this is all the sort of mids and high mids here, just distortion turned all the way up. And then the very highest highs, this band also turned all the way up. The multi-band version of doing this kind of distortion works better for me because you get less of the intermodulation distortion, basically overlapping frequencies distorting together, which can sound more sort of splattered. This, you get that crispy, crunchy high end on the kick drum. So if I take it off, it's just that very simple, kind of unexciting little click sound, you know? When you put this on there, it splays out that click, so it's just a bigger, broader sound. And then a little more overall distortion with Decapitator, although this is relatively subtle on there. That's without it. That's with it. Okay, so then the other part of it is this outside kick mic. And so this is also gated, same, you can see I'm doing some automation here just to make sure that it never opens for anything other than the kick drum. And so I went through, you can see I automated through the entire song to make sure that it does exactly what I wanted to. Because if this mic opens when the snare drum hits or opens on a cymbal hit or something, it basically ruins the drum mix. So there's no room for error there. Excuse me. So now here's EQ on this kick drum. Big, huge scooping out of 278 hertz. And a boost in the subby stuff. Plus 5 dB at 40 hertz just to add more weight down there. Let's see, did I do anything with this? Yep, so here's a high pass. And it looked like there was a little bit of automation going on there. No, okay, yeah. Yeah, that was me just poking around. So here's a high pass at 46 hertz with this active cue, so you can create a resonance right where the high pass is. And then a little more of this same fab filter action. So there's a couple reasons that I do this. So this looks basically like the identical settings as the fab filter that's on the inside kick mic. I do this because everywhere you have a crossover point with any sort of multiband processor, you're going to have phase shift in and around this crossover point. And so it will change the way the inside mic and the outside mic add up. And you'll get weird cancellations or peaks or resonances because the phasing is changing at these crossover points. So I put the same plug-in on both of these mics to make sure that they're still adding up the same way. Sometimes those phase changes can actually work in your favor. It looks like in this case I didn't feel like it was doing that for me. So I made sure that the phasing was staying consistent between the two microphones. Okay, and then here's Decapitator again. We can hear some of the stuff with and without. So there's the without the gate. It's actually pretty well isolated. I don't know why I was so militant about making sure it didn't open on anything else. And then, so that's what it sounds like without the EQ. You know, you just get a lot more of that kind of puffy, low mid-range stuff instead of having a really deep, heavier kick drum. Okay, so here's the high pass. So that's without it. This is a little more subtle. But in my experience, doing this move, it just eliminates frequencies that are sort of below what's important for the kick drum and focuses things more in a range that you can actually feel through most speaker systems. I find that we're all working with limited headroom, and so I don't want to have 10 or 20 hertz hovering around on the kick drum eating up headroom if it's not something that I'm actually going to feel or hear in the mix. So I usually try and make sure to eliminate that if it's not actually doing something for me. So there's without the Saturn plugin. Yeah, so this is actually bringing out, some of the attack sound on this mic, and it's a nice sound on this mic too. Really nice, satisfying little attack on there. So then both of these add up to sound like that, and they go through this kick bus. And so I've got a good old Renaissance compressor on there that's making it a lot more schmacky sounding. So that's without it. That's with it. Got a little bit of this going on. The old Kramer Pi compressor. And then just adding a little more punch to this. So it looks like I'm boosting right around 116 hertz. Yeah. And so all of this has to work with this guy, which is like the cool, low, resonant low end. He calls it FOK, which I'm assuming means front of kick. So this is a microphone that's probably, a few feet out in front of the kick drum. And you really get the sound of the kick drum, the whole sound of the kick drum, and also a little bit of the room in there. And so you can hear there's a little more bleed on this. If I take the gate off, you hear a whole lot of everything, especially the way it's processed. So it's got to be gated. And so this, in order to get this to gate properly, I'm using an external key to do that. So you can see I'm selected external here. Bus 23 is receiving signal from this track right here, which is labeled as kick gate key. and you can see it's going to bus 23. It's going to another track as well for some other purpose. We can figure that out in a second. And so kick gate key is a duplicate of the inside mic, which gates very accurately, and then I'm using that signal to make sure that this front of kick drum microphone only opens when the kick drum hits. It'll never open any other time. Okay, so then more FabFilter Saturn. Gotta love that. Okay, so there's really nothing going on with the lower half of the frequency spectrum, but the upper half, same thing. I'm distorting the mids and high frequencies. It's just an effect that my ears are very used to because of tape machines. I've talked about it before, but on tape machines, the distortion, the amount of distortion increases as the frequencies get higher. So this is sort of emulating that effect. I'm having, very little distortion in the lower frequencies and a whole lot more distortion in the higher frequencies. Feels more like it's coming off of a tape machine for me. Okay, so then, because all this stuff was recorded straight into the computer, there's no tape machine involved at all. And so if it was something that was tracked through a tape machine, I probably wouldn't be inclined to do as much of this so aggressively. Okay, looks like no EQ going on there. And then this supercharger thing. So yeah, this is a plug-in. I don't know how many people are familiar with this thing, but it's part of the Native Instruments collection of their cool sample library instruments and stuff, and they also make plugins. I use their plugins. Some of them are really, really cool. This is a good one. This is basically a general emulation of a very mu or Fairchild type compressor, and they've got a few different modes. Let's hear with and without here. That's with. That's without. Yeah, so, kind of what you would expect. It's got a cool, aggressive, crunchy sound. Brings out the decay of the kick drum a little more. Effective on there. So then I have a duplicate of the front of kick mic. Yeah, this is just all distortion. Still gated. So there's a bunch of that. No EQ. So this is really, I think, just to help the front of kick sound. And there's the real heavy lifting of the distortion part. Good old Sans amp. And then me playing with the timing of it, which at the end of the day is me playing with the phasing, just how it phases with the other stuff. So, so without the distortion, this thing sounded like this. There it is with the distortion. So let's check this out. So that's with this extra distortion. That's without it. Whoops. So one more time. Here it is with. There it is without. There it is with again. So it adds more of this like this like gritty, noisy overtone in the drums, just to make them sound denser and thicker, more explosive in the room. Really hear it on the kick drum. Yeah. Cool. So then moving on here, let's see what else we got going on. So there's some room stuff. Okay, yeah, so this is also gated to only open when the kick drum hits. So here's the gate, and so this is coming from bus 30. So it's the same source. You can see here that the kick gate key is sending to both bus 23 and bus 30. And the difference is, here's a master fader for bus 30. What I needed to do was delay this a little bit. So it's delayed 1,150 samples. And that's because this room mic is presumably, across the room. And so the sound is arriving there later. If I have this gate open at the same time as the a closer mic on the kick drum, you're going to hear all this noise right before the kick drum actually hits. And so I delay the key that's going to this this room mic, which is really there to just sort of add air to the kick drum hits, to make sure that you don't hear this weird noise before it actually impacts. Okay, so then it looks like I did the same thing with the snare drum. Yeah, so this is gated just to open on the snare drum. I'm high passing it, accentuating some barky mid-range for the snare drum. More of this distortion in the highs to emulate tape. Playing with the phasing a little bit. These timing delays are all about phasing. More distortion. So here's good old lo-fi. And then this is coming from bus 29. So let's see who is responsible for that. Oh, here's snare key. Yeah. So it's this guy right here. And so it looks like I didn't need this for anything other than that room being gated for the snare drum. So I timed it appropriately for that. Okay. So then let's see what's going on with the snare drum. There's a lot of snare stuff going on here. So here's the close mic on the snare. It's gated. Got some EQ there, adding some brightness, adding some mid-range bark, like right around 800. That's without the EQ. That's with it. Here's that same EQ move. This crossover point looks like it's a little different. I optimized it for the snare more. Not quite as much distortion on the very highs. This is mostly just to really push the mid-range. And then more EQ. This is really trying to get the mid-range to cut through on the snare drum. I kind of prefer it when they impact more, instead of just being a click, that you actually hear an impact of the tone of the drum. So that's without that. Yeah, that's important. That's an important EQ move there. Okay, so then I have a duplicate of the snare track. So this is identical audio files. And this one is just for the lows. So you can see, boosted some lows there. I did this identical Saturn thing because of the phasing issues of having these crossover points. So I have to put that on here to make sure that it doesn't phase weird with this other one. You can see what happens. So here they are playing together. If I bypass this, with it, you can hear the mid-range get tweaky in there. Some weird cancellations going on. Yeah, it's really, it needs to sound like that. Okay, and then here, this is where the low-end punch is being manufactured. So there's this giant boost at 140 hertz. That's sort of the fundamental low tone of the snare drum. So there it is by itself. and if I bypass this EQ, you lose, all of the low frequency punch. You also see I'm padding the input of this EQ to give me room to be able to boost all of this level, because I'm boosting, like 13 dB at 140 hertz. So I turned it down here so you're not clipping within the system. Depending on whether you're floating or not, which bit resolution you're using, maybe it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't need to do this, but it makes more sense to me just from coming from mixing in the analog world. I want to give myself room to do this boost, so it's a clean boost, and it also just puts the fader, so I don't have to put this fader like at -20 or something, just puts it in a range where it's easier to adjust. So that's those two, and then there's a third source for the snare drum, which is this guy, and so this looks like it was actually printed. This is one of my favorite old snare drum tricks, the Chandler tube driver, and that's what it sounds like. Let me see if I can pull up the pictures of this guy. Yeah, so it's going to be in this set of pictures. So this is my actual recall pictures for this mix session. And so in here, we're going to find this thing. There it is. There's the Chandler tube driver. So I don't know that there's a picture where you can actually see the whole thing, but this is a setting that I use pretty much all the time. The boost switch is off, drive is set pretty low, contour and bias all the way up. That's what makes it sort of deeper and warmer sounding with the distortion. Outputs all the way up, and then the EQ you kind of just set to taste. I want a lot of mid-range, so that's all the way up. The highs and lows are set lower. And so that is what this signal is. And so it was in here as a hardware insert. I printed it back into the session, so I wouldn't have to set it back up if I did recalls. So here's all the snare stuff together. And now this is without the tube driver. Here's without the lows. So that's just the snare drum mic with some EQ on it. There it is with the tube driver and the extra lows. Okay. So we got some toms here. Let's see what happened here. We'll check out this spot right here. Man, these toms were really tuned as good as they get. Okay, so fab filter gate. Yeah, so I'm mostly, boosting some presence stuff, some mid-range stuff, and some low thuddy stuff. It looks like I actually automated that a little bit. Pretty subtle move. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I thought I was going to be doing more with that than I ended up actually doing. High pass, so trying to do that same thing of just focusing the low frequency energy in a place where it where all the weight is underneath this tom, where it's tuned, and then this same Fab Filter Saturn makes it sound like it's coming off a tape machine. So let me see if we can find a spot where he plays a little more rack tom action. Here we go. This is good. We'll loop that. So there's without the Saturn thing. That's a big difference. Just brings out all those cool harmonics and stuff. That's without the high pass. And then that's without the little boost, the presence boost. And okay, so then the floor tom. Let's see. Is there better? Let's see if there's a better spot for the floor tom here. Let's try this. This might be a good spot. Cool, yeah, we'll play with that. Same thing, it's gated. Yeah, it's a big boost for the lows. Trying to make it sound a little heavier, deeper. Same high pass thing. This is set at a lower frequency, so this is at 71 hertz. The rack tom was at 84 hertz. This same guy. That's without it. Man, this thing right there, it adds so much life. I'm really impressed with this plugin. Oh, and here we go. Here's the supercharger. So now without the supercharger. Yeah, just, you know, adding a little more attack. Pretty cool. So there's the tom, the tom mics. And of course, you know, the tom mics, always the overheads always play a big part in that. So here's the overhead. Let's see what happened here. So this, I think I was using a different version of this TG series compressor. There was a version of that plugin that was available at the time when I mixed this. It's not available now, so I tried to recreate the setting with this version of you know, that compressor emulation. So it's basically, you know, a fast setting. This is a pretty extreme limiter, this compressor. And it just makes it so everything is pulled forward all the time. That's without it. Makes the cymbals really thick. Longer decays on the crashes. Okay, yeah, so I'm just pulling out lows in the overheads. You know, I'm getting it from the close mics, all the impact with the low end. So I didn't need it here at all. So this is 172 hertz, pulling all that stuff out. Yeah, you know, it's just eating up space in the mix that I need for the low end of the guitars and other things, and I'd rather have these bursts of it that punch through instead of this like omnipresent, just low, mid, you know, muck that's just sort of taking up space. So just take it out. And then there's some very specific things, just, you know, this is where the snare drum is, right around 150 hertz, and then a thing right here to help like the kick drum and maybe the lows and the toms, some real peaky stuff. Just make it more specific to what's, you know, the information that's in those mics. Okay, hi-hat. Taking out all the low-end gook. Don't need all that. Just want to hear the hi-hat. Supercharger. I was enjoying this thing at the time. Plugins sort of fall in and out of favor for me. I was really enjoying this thing at that time, and honestly, I haven't used it much since, but it worked great on this round of mixing, so I certainly recommend checking it out. Decapitator, little crunch on there. So that's without all the stuff. There it is with it. Okay, cool. So here's room stuff, and I'm gating the room. So this is, you know, kind of like ends up being more like an old Phil Collins record or something, gated room mics. And it looks like I'm taking off the gating in places, so when he plays a drum fill, it sounds more open. And really, it just makes the kick and the snare sound more explosive unto itself, and you have less cymbal wash going on all the time. And then turned way down here is this really extreme version of the room mics that that Greg and his engineer Ian like to do, where he uses his Levelor hardware compressor thing, limiter thing, and it's just destroyed room mics that just like is just completely flattened, so the rooms are just always there, and it's really cool as an undercurrent for this whole thing. It just fills in all the space and just makes everything sound really thick, you know. And so here's the whole thing again, and then we'll get into some of the overall processing. So here's without that Levelor room thing. There it is with it. You hear that extra long decay on the drum. It's really cool. Such a cool trick. That's mostly just the close mics, except for my gated room specifically for the kick and snare. There's more of the room in there. So the next question is, what's happening overall to the overall drum mix? So I have a hardware insert on here. This is my distressors. And, they're in this rack right here. You can see them, you know, bouncing away on the drums. So let's see what it sounds like with and without those. I'm telling you right now, that's a huge part of the drum sound. It's a lot of it. So that's with the distressors. That's without. There it is with it. I mean, it makes the whole drum sound happen. It's all mixed to accommodate it, and it's a pretty, you know, heavy-handed setting. So we'll take a look at that. 20-to-1 on the ratio. I always have all three of these illuminated. So the link, the high pass, and the presence peak. And what that does is it makes it so the compressors are not overly sensitive to compressing the kick drum, and then let more kick drum through. If I take those off, it just, you know, completely annihilates the kick drum in the balance of the drum kit. And so when I use distressors on drums, pretty much always have all three of those lights illuminated. And so then the rest of the setting is input is at 6.5. The input you just set to get it so it's compressing the amount that you want. I just put the attack as slow as possible because I'm really using this to manufacture more of an attack on the drums. Then 2.5 on the release. That will vary based on the tempo, and so I just set it so the room swells back in a time, you know, at a rate that feels musical, feels like it makes sense with the tempo. So it's not bringing up too much of the cymbals, and it's not choking off the drum, you know, based on the tempo. And then the output, you know, I just set to whatever's not distorting wildly and wherever it's going, you know. So yeah, there it is, distressors. Okay, and so this song was originally mixed at Barefoot on an Undertone console, and I was EQing this drum return on the console. I used this little plugin to sort of emulate the setting that was on the console. It was just some, you know, overall brightening, and so that's without it. That's with it. Probably use a little more of that. So again, here's with distressors. That's without the distressors. Yep, it's all about the distressors. Bam. So that's pretty much it. On the main mix, there's a tiny bit of a API 2500 which you do hear a little bit affecting the drum mix, but I can bypass that for a second. So there it is without it. There it is with it. And, you know, there is some compression on the individual kick drum, you know, and you saw there was some compression on the low tom. No compression on the individual snare mics. That all is handled by in the overall drum mix by the distressors. Room mics got compressed when they were recorded. So we'll do this AB one more time because it is just interesting where the drum sound can go. So this is with all the mixing. And now as they were recorded. That's the original recording. That's the mixed version. All right, there it is. Drum mixing with all kinds of distortion and EQ and compression to try and get it to that place where the drums, you know, cut through the mix in a cool way and have a cool presence. And really I'm trying to, you know, accentuate the natural characteristics in the drum recording, the room, the way they're tuned, the cool overtones in the drums, bring all of that out as much as possible so you really, you know, can hear and experience the cool sound that was recorded and not have it get covered up by the organ and guitars and vocals and all the other things that are going on. And so this helps it cut through. So I hope that was helpful. That's how I like to try and do it. All right, thanks. See you guys later. Bye.
You put the whoosy on the whatsy, attach the whatsy to the whoosy, connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit go. You hook the gidget to the gadget, adjust the gadget to the gidget, unhook the dingly-dang from the diddly-doo.